to order. If everyone can please rise for a moment of reflection and a pledge of allegiance. Thank you.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Here.
Mrs. Hoover?
Here.
Miss Royce? I'm here. Mrs. Bowling?
Here.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Here.
Mr. Girton?
Here.
Mr. Braid?
Here. We have all members present this evening. Moving on to amendments of the agenda. We are removing minutes for December 10th, the Finance Committee report from November 12th, and December the 23rd, removing the DEI Advisory Board report from December 4th and January 8th. So that means we will only have item 3 for the committee reports. We are removing ordinance M2, which is the appropriations ordinance, and we are adding M4, which is the ordinance authorizing the mayor and safety service director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with local union number 445 of the International Association of Firefighters. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we amend the agenda as stated.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to amend the agenda as stated. Is there a second? Mrs. Winterbauer.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Miss Royce? I'll vote yes. Sorry. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braid?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to minutes of previous meetings. So this will be the minutes for October 22nd, November 12th, November 26th, and the special meeting on December 23rd. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we approve the minutes as of read.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to approve the minutes as if read. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Miss Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Girton?
Yes.
Mr. Braid?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to special presentations. Mr. Powers.
Good evening. This evening, we will bring in our newest firefighter to be sworn in. So if we could, we'll take the floor here. I'll ask the chief to come off the floor.
Traditionally. You would raise your right hand, repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Tyler Humphrys,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
to abide by the Constitution,
to abide by the Constitution
the laws of the United States of America,
and laws of the United States of America,
the Constitution and laws of the State of Ohio,
the Constitution and laws of the State of Ohio,
the laws and ordinances of the City of Norwood,
the laws and ordinances of the City of Norwood,
and to execute the duties of my office
to execute the duty of my office
as firefighter
as firefighter
of Norwood Fire Department
of the Norwood Fire Department
to the best of my ability. To the best of my ability. So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Go back and
Good job, buddy.
We do have one request to address council this evening, and that is Bishop Sonny James.
Good evening, and what a fitting evening to come and to share in such a timely celebration. Want to first, I'm sure most of us are, but want to make sure that we keep the families in California lifted in our prayers. This is a little bit difficult for me on this evening because I have truly seen, guys, such advancements in our community. If you guys could only see me out in the community, I mean, I really, maybe I've got a set of pom-poms and cheering things to match up with. But at the same time, it troubles me because it seems like as we take multiple steps forward, and trust me, we have. You know, just days ago, I was blessed and honored to ask to offer the blessing for our new Hamilton County prosecutor, Connie Pillage. In fact, Mr. Bonzo was there. And we had a room full of some of the most notable dignitaries locally and statewide. And I was truly humbled to be even a part of it. It was a phenomenal atmosphere. And I was so pleased to have our Mayor Aftab introduce me to the group. And I was just thinking before I stood before the crowd, man, wouldn't this be nice to have this type of reception in Norwood? But literally just hours after that, I was painfully reminded of how, guys, we still allow divisiveness and division to plague us. We still allow some of the old protocols to live in today's world where it shouldn't be. And I came tonight to encourage us. I asked before the end of the year that coming into this new year, let's start off by at least saying hello to each other. But you know, what folks do to me, hey, you might get away with it. I try to be nice every other Tuesday. But what you do to some of those that I care so deeply for, that cannot go unaccountable. And I know that we have, you know, these private or social interest groups that want to say that we are one people and that we are together. But I want to say to all of our residents in Norwood, we've got to take a stance and make a change on all the things that continue to hold us back. I didn't know Mr. Bonzo was going to be here tonight, but I'm sure if he were to speak, he'd say, man, that was pretty awesome. And to have some of my parishioners standing there excited, but then just a day later, to be in the same room, literally feet away from our city leadership, who doesn't even have the heart to say, hello, Bishop. I want us to change. And here's my thing. I'm asking every person that votes in Norwood, Ohio, come this next election, and I'll be leading the way. So there won't be any ifs, ands, or buts about it. I want us to stand up against this tyranny, against this evil that continues to plague our community. We've come such a long way, guys. But when peers sit back and say, hey, Bishop, what's up with that? And then they express anger. Guys, I want all of us to be safe. And some of you know I've put my life on the line because there are some people that really want to get in Norwood. And I always say over my dead body, and I mean that, literally. But to go and to be amongst peers outside of my community and to be well received, and then come into my own community and literally feet away, you don't have the decency to say hello. We've got to stop that. And I'm asking every voter in Norwood, on the next election, let's stop that nonsense. Stand up against that hate and that evil. God bless you all. Oh, and Happy New Year.
All right, moving on to next items on the agenda. That is the Small Business and Economic Development Committee report from December 16th.
I apologize, Mr. Gary. I did not catch that on the report or on the agenda, and I do not have that ready for you today. So should I move that we table it to next meeting?
We can move that to the next
I would like to
meeting.
move that. Thank you.
All right, then we are moving on to second readings of ordinances and resolutions. And the first, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $20 million of special obligation development revenue funding bonds, Series 2025 Rookwood Exchange Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, for the purpose of refunding the outstanding special obligation development revenue and refunding bonds, Series 2015 Rookwood Exchange Project, authorizing the execution and delivery of a trust agreement to secure such bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of the related transaction documents, and authorizing and approving related matters. Mrs. Bowling.
I move we have the second reading.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to have the second reading of the ordinance. Mrs. Franzen.
A second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Any interest in just having the second, third reading and getting this approved tonight? Anybody interested in that, getting it off our agenda? Just a question. If not, no big deal.
Mrs. Franzen.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. That way Alexis has to read it twice. Which,
Mrs. Bowling, will you agree to amend your
Yes.
motion
I'm happy to amend as stated.
Thank you. Appreciate
Yeah.
that.
to suspend the rules and have the second and third readings of the resolution?
Yes.
Mrs. Franzen?
and I am happy to amend my second.
Thank you. So the new motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mrs. Franzen, is to suspend the rules and have the second and third readings of the ordinance. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I will vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gergen?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have both readings of the ordinance.
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $20 million of special obligation development revenue, refunding bonds, Series 2025 Rookwood Exchange Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, for the purpose of refunding the outstanding special obligation development revenue and refunding bonds, Series 2015 Rookwood Exchange Project, authorizing the execution and delivery of a trust agreement to secure such bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of the related transaction documents, and authorizing and approving related matters. Thank you. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $20 million of special obligation development revenue refunding bonds, Series 2025 Rookwood Exchange Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, for the purpose of refunding the outstanding special obligation development revenue and refunding bonds, Series 2015 Rookwood Exchange Project, authorizing the execution and delivery of a trust agreement to secure such bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of the related transaction documents, and authorizing and approving related matters.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mr. Garten.
Second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Garten. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item, ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoke, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes. Mr. Braden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I would make a motion that we have the second and third reading.
Motion by Mr. Braden to suspend the rules and have the second and third readings of the ordinance.
Thank you.
Mrs. Franzen.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Franzen. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? Yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have the second and third readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code related to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretation, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes. Ordinance amending Part 11, Planning and Zoning Code relating to smoking, chewing, electronic smoking, and vaping retail product establishments to promote clarity and consistency in policy interpretations, and by directing these types of retail business establishments to appropriate locations and other related changes.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Can I make a motion to pass the ordinance?
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Mr. Braden.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. The first is an ordinance authorizing the execution of an agreement between the City of Norwood, Ohio, and the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, to provide for the treatment and disposal of domestic and industrial wastewaters and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Franzen.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just because I don't remember presiding over something like this, can anybody give me an overview of exactly what I'm voting for here? I didn't really take.
Mr.
I didn't
Powers?
dive deep into this.
Yes, good evening again. So this is an agreement for us to do the billing for the Metropolitan Sewer District. So part of your water bill, you'll see that sewer bill on there as well. And this is just the agreement that allows us to be their collection agent for that. We've had an agreement like this for 50 or 60 years. This one has been out of date for quite some time. MSD has had several communities that they've reached out to try to get these updated. We're one of those. So that's what this is. It's mostly a continuation of the previous contract that was last signed in the mid-70s with a couple of updates that we requested.
Okay. Respond.
Mr. Braden.
Yeah, just, do you have an overview of the updates, like just a cliff notes of the updates maybe for me?
The biggest update was that we requested a mechanism to resolve any disputes if billing increases or billing changes result in the city spending more money than the 7% that we're allowed to collect as basically the billing agent. So if our costs go up, there's now a mechanism in here for us to go back and say, we feel like we should get a larger portion of that fee.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? All right, motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brayton?
Yes.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
An ordinance authorizing the execution of an agreement between the City of Norwood, Ohio, and the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, to provide for the treatment and disposal of domestic and industrial wastewaters and declaring an emergency. An ordinance authorizing the execution of an agreement between the City of Norwood, Ohio, and the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, to provide for the treatment and disposal of domestic and industrial wastewaters and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the execution of an agreement between the City of Norwood, Ohio, the Board of County Commissioners of Hamilton County, Ohio, to provide for the treatment and disposal of domestic and industrial wastewaters and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
I make a motion, we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Bowling.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. That is a resolution requesting the City of Norwood Planning Commission to consider amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code regarding regulation of food trucks. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we suspend the rules and have all three readings.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Mrs. Hoover.
I'll second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Mrs. Bowling.
So just a kind of quick overview. This is what the Small Business and Economic Development Committee has been working on for the last few months. Amending in ways that we felt was appropriate to the original proposed ordinance that was sent to us by the Planning Commission. And so what we're moving to do here, what the resolution is doing, is we're moving it from committee and sending it back to the Planning Commission with the suggested edits that we've made.
Mrs. Hoover.
I'd like to add that this was taken with the comments from both our local food truck vendors as well as, and Mrs. Bowling, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the Food Truck
Association.
So that was, I feel pretty good that we hit the things that we needed to hit. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Bowling, seconded by Mrs. Hoover, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I will vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes. Please have all three readings of the resolution.
A resolution requesting the City of Norwood Planning Commission to consider amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code regarding regulation of food trucks. A resolution requesting the City of Norwood Planning Commission to consider amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code regarding regulation of food trucks. A resolution requesting the City of Norwood Planning Commission to consider amendments to the Planning and Zoning Code regarding regulation of food trucks.
Thank you. Mrs. Winterbauer.
Make a motion, we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mrs. Winterbauer to pass the resolution. Mrs. Bowling.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Bowling. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor and safety service director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with local union number 445 of the International Association of Firefighters, consistent with the terms of the attached Exhibit A for the period from January 1, 2025 through December 31, 2027, and declaring an emergency. Mrs. Hoover.
I request an executive session for the purpose of preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment.
Is there a second? Mrs. Winterbauer.
Second?
Second by Mrs. Winterbauer. Motion by Mrs. Hoover, seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer, is to enter executive session for the purpose as stated. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yeah.
Mr.
Yes.
Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. At this time, council will enter executive session. We do ask that the sound and video be turned off and anyone other than administration to exit council chambers until executive session has concluded.
Second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Gerton. Any discussion? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate that. So before we move on here, I just want to make a statement. You know, we're in good faith. We can move forward with this and feel comfortable. But I just want to employ that all parties involved in the future, as we act on good faith, knowing that our police and fire budget has the ability to cripple us. And if we're not careful, that'll happen, as seen as where we're at right now. And I just want everybody to understand that, and we'll move forward, and knowing that both parties, we're going to do the best for Norwood and what's best for us and the community and our financial state. And that's what I'm hoping. I'm asking everybody to do that, and I'm ready to vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Motion on the floor by Mrs. Franzen, seconded by Mr. Gerton, is to suspend the rules and have all three readings of the ordinance. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I'll vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Please have all three readings of the ordinance.
Ordinance authorizing the mayor and safety service director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with local union number 445 of the International Association of Firefighters, consistent with the terms of the attached Exhibit A for the period from January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2027, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the mayor and safety service director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with the local union number 445 of the International Association of Firefighters, consistent with the terms of the attached Exhibit A for the period from January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2027, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the mayor and safety service director to enter into a collective bargaining agreement with local union number 445 of the International Association of Firefighters, consistent with the terms of the attached Exhibit A for the period from January 1st, 2025 through December 31st, 2027, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mrs. Hoover.
I second.
Seconded by Mrs. Hoover. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce, I will vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gerton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is administration reports. Mayor Schneider.
Quickly, tomorrow is the Chamber of Commerce meeting where the city's State of the City address will be presented by me. That's a lunchtime affair. The Elm Avenue Storm Sewer Improvement Program is moving forward with utility assessments being discussed and worked with through the community members that are going to require those utility assessments from. I think it's going pretty well, and we should have that project should be moving well. I think the groundbreaking's in spring, so it's going to be a quick project to get started and hopefully all completed. And then snow, talking to Clint Zimmerman about the recent snowstorm, the 10-year big snowstorm. They had a pretty good response, actually. Our streets looked pretty darn good. They did have a hydraulic line and a brake line on one of the vehicles, but our mechanics were able to get those back up. And quite frankly, I think once again, Norwood really did a great job with that, thanks to Public Works. That's all I have.
Thank
Is there
you.
any questions?
Questions for Mayor Schneider? All right, Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So at the next meeting, we will have the estimates presented to you all for the earnings tax estimates for fiscal year 25 through 29. So that's will be what's going to be part of the 5-year plan. So we'll get it to Finance Committee beforehand, but I'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of that. We are also we'll have like a little earnings tax report too for you all. Short story is I think we're up about 7% was the number from last year. Was that 4% from last year, but it's a higher percent from, I estimated lower than what we actually closed last year. We'll get the final numbers to you, but.
4 year over year, I believe you all went 7 over.
Thank you, Tim. So anyways, we'll have that for you all, but no, we appreciate all of your support, and we're already planning the office. Tim's doing a great job planning for this next tax season. So one sneak peek I can tell you is that we are going to, last year was the first year that we voluntarily extended tax day 3 extra days after the federal filing deadline. So we are going to do that again this year. It was actually a huge success where we didn't have, as long of a line on tax day, and it also gave people that file, last minute time to get their then Norwood taxes in a couple days later without stressing. So it was a huge success. We were really happy with it. We had a lot of great feedback, and that'll be the same thing. So April 18th, 2025 will be the deadline for municipal taxes. Yep.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bonzal? All right. Mr. Miracle?
Thank you, Mr. President. Deputy Auditor Marcus Patterson is working on our Certificate of Estimated Resources, which we have to have filed with Hamilton County by January 31st. And then looking forward to the Finance Committee meeting on the 28th of this month. Quite a bit of information to share with the team.
Questions for Mr. Miracle? All right. Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. Later on in the agenda, and when we get there, you can just receive and file as if read. And I do the cover letter because I didn't used to get asked during executive or during, administrative reports if I had anything to say. But this is my annual report. I'm required, the law department is required to file an annual report with council at the first council meeting of the year. I think the mayor's is the second, and everybody else gets to wait a little longer. I come out of the holidays and it's like, I got to file that annual report. What the heck did I do? And to be honest with you, trying to remember it all is hard. I do, first of all, though, want to thank Darren Hackworth and Robert Miller for our new offices because they're awesome and all of their help in getting that done. But I'm just thinking about the law department a city law department is such a weird thing. There are so many things and different things that cross our desks, and sometimes we don't have a lot of notice on it. I mean, Mr. Gary has been out, and Ms. Cornelius as well, the last couple weeks working on getting easements signed for the Elm Avenue project. That's just a lot of paperwork and kind of thing. And I'm like, Tim, you ever done an easement? And I was like, yeah, I've done those, but it's probably been 20 years. So he's at least done one, which I never have drafted one. So it's that kind of thing. It's like, I don't know, or the new community authority, right? And suddenly we have 100 questions about it. And I'm like, I never heard of it before. What was it? August, September. So it's that kind of thing that comes up. I mean, it's the easements, new community, zoning issues, mayor's court, public records, public meetings, all kinds of the legislation that we've drafted, a tremendous amount this year, and a lot of it very complicated, and some of it we've not seen before. And I just want to report one thing on mayor's court. It's not shown up, and you get the mayor's court report every month. I'm amazed, I'm shocked by how many people are speeding that are like every mayor's court. There's somebody who's going over 100 miles an hour on I-71, which is amazing to me. And the other striking thing is how many are from Uzbekistan, and we need translators. So we end up translating. This part of what we have to do too. So we need a translator. We have to transfer the case downtown and then try to find someone who speaks whatever language it is. So it's been a busy year. It's been a lot going on. I want to thank all of pretty much every employee of the city of Norwood. The police officers work with the service safety director, the development office, the treasurer's office, the auditor's office, human resources, the clerk's office. The clerks, of course, they're awesome. They're absolutely incredible. But the people that I work with within the city administration that you may not see very often are amazingly competent and professional, and hardworking and willing to do whatever it takes to get done. And I really appreciate that. It makes my job so much easier. And I also have to, of course, thank Tim Gary and Kat Cornelius, who are way better than me, and I'm lucky to have them. So if anybody's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Moore?
All right, cool.
All right, thank you. Moving on to unfinished business. Any unfinished business? Oh, Mrs. Hoover.
Thank you. I do have a few items. I'm hoping I got some really great, that's a couple down. There we go. The first is really excited. This was something that came out of the Committee of the Whole, is the Norwood City Council community survey. And it's right now, it's just live on our website and the city's Facebook page. And some of us have put it on our social medias. We were supposed to have a committee of the whole, but due to snow, we did not. So we will be sharing the further plan on how we will be disseminating this information, making sure that we get it to the churches and the businesses and the we'll put it up in all the schools. We'll put it up in all the places. We would love for you to share it with your folks. We're already getting responses. We have over 500, 573 as of right now. And some people are asking for us to reach out to them, and that's something we will also be discussing at the Committee of the Whole. So just because you said that please reach out, we will get to you. We just want to make sure that we do it in an organized fashion. So that's super, super exciting. And we're getting some really wonderful feedback, even if some of it's not very nice, but some of it's, oh, and guess what? People want the streets done. Newsflash. The next one, super excited. We had our second annual Norwood Celebrates MLK Blood Drive. It was on Saturday in that crazy day after the crazy snow. It was still a phenomenally successful event. I want to thank fellow Councilwoman Franzen and Royce for being there. And we got some really great sweatpants. It was fantastic. It was neighbors. It was Factory 52 residents. It was just a really lovely event. And we met all of our metrics. So look for that again next year. Next item is the fourth annual Norwood Celebrates MLK. We have a week of service opportunities throughout Norwood. So you can see on there, we've got Baby Bear, Dress for Success, the Zion Food Pantry, Norwood Together, New Vision Missionary Baptist Food Pantry, Norwood Parks, and Focus Cincinnati. These are all organizations in Norwood that we have over 50 volunteer opportunities. Not just on MLK Day, but the whole week. So would love for folks to sign up. One is a Norwood Parks. Oh, actually, that might be my next one. Oh, I'm going to jump. Okay. Can we go to Focus? Yeah. I want to share the Focus Cincinnati has, if you recall, Charlene Myers came to City Council to talk about this. It was in the Housing Committee. And I want to just share, I know it's late, but a quick story, because this is one of those really great collaborative experiences. Charlene Myers is a former principal in CPS schools who happens to know my husband, who's very interested in getting a warming shelter here in the community. It was something that I tried doing a couple years ago, but because of our staffing and lots of challenges, we weren't able to do it in City Hall or at the rec. So we were really actively trying to do a thing, but the city couldn't. And this is perfect. This is when our community organizations can step forward. I got her connected with Kevin Finn, who is the executive director for Strategies to Prevent Homelessness, who did come to council maybe a year or two ago. And he has been instrumental in helping kind of create the framework for this warming center. And if you were outside shoveling snow, you know how cold it was. And this center can quite literally save lives. It is at what was formerly the Korean Methodist Church. It is now Christ Temple Church. And their pastor, Pastor Mingo, who also came to council, folks remember a few months ago, He and Charlene and Community Strategies Against Homelessness have put this together, and they have, it's a warm space, they have hot food, they have community, they have congregation, and really, it's a really lovely thing. Unfortunately, we did lose there was a death in the community last night due to hypothermia. And so this is a very, very real need. And I'm so happy that it is being addressed. So it will be open. I drove by today. It's actually a block away from my house. And the sign, basically when the sign is there, it is open. They have security. It's warm. It's lovely. You feel free to stop by just to say hi. That would be lovely. All right. Sorry, the next thing is kind of new business, kind of old business.
Well, we can. Are any of your other items unfinished? Or because we can give other people a chance if they want to share some unfinished business. Any other unfinished business? I will add, so I'm going to jump back up to the survey, just kind of to piggyback on some of the things that Mrs. Hoover already stated. So for anyone who wants some of the background or history on this whole thing, May 7th, Committee of the Whole meeting, August 6th, Committee of the Whole meeting, and most recently the December 3rd Committee of the Whole meeting. We kind of go into some lengthy discussion, some background to the questions. I know I read a thing about the bikes. There were about 12 or 15 different community surveys that are used nationwide that I looked at to pool questions. And their big thing was pedestrian, traffic, walking, bike, public transportation, cars. So that's kind of where those questions came from. What else? You mentioned the 573. January 8th, we had 392 of the surveys completed, and January 9th, 126. It was kind of between 5 and 20 every other day thereafter. But we will be talking about the plan going forward to send it out like to members of the Norwood Chamber of Commerce, which that's where you see the little bubbles here that I work here. You know, we want to not only get the feedback from employees in the city of Norwood who work here or who live here, as well as those who simply come here for their place of employment. One of the jokes that I read was pertaining to the oil change. So yes, I did throw the oil change on there because some of the thought process was, all right, if you're going to Minkings or you're going to CarX or Midas, are you also stopping by Wendy's? Are you stopping at Brookwood? Is there something else? What types of services have brought you to the city, and what else are you doing besides just coming to get your oil change? That's assuming that they sit there while they're waiting and they scan the QR code and they go to complete the survey. All right, I'm done with unfinished business. Anybody else? New business? Any new business? Mrs. Winterbauer?
I would like to put a standing finance committee meeting for the fourth Tuesday, starting at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Also, please go 25. Yes, there are potholes and they haven't been filled yet. We would like to not go over multiple claims in finance committee.
If you can send that information about the standing to Angela, and that way she can
Thank you.
make sure that the calendar is blocked going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Franson.
I'm going to schedule a infrastructure committee meeting for, I'm hoping next Wednesday. That's when Mr. Lingenfelter of PLK is able to come and talk about the development south of Robertson that they've talked about in the past. It's meant to be more of like a informal kind of question and answer with him. I know, Sam, that you have issues with Wednesdays sometimes.
Oh,
Yes, normally. I am a tentative yes. I will be on a plane back
Excellent.
from vacation. So if I fly on schedule,
So if there's no weather.
maybe we will see. Tentatively, yes.
Great. I checked the council chambers appear to be not used, so I will email Sharon and I will send an agenda out. It'll be mostly focused on PLK and that development, as well as just general traffic and pedestrian concerns in the area, since that's come up multiple times. And I will also be distributing some flyers to the porches of people around that area so that they know about it and don't have to hear about it last minute. So I have a friend who has volunteered to help me with that. So if you know of anyone who's interested that's not within that 3 or 4 block area, please feel free to spread the word.
What time?
6 p.m., sorry. 6 p.m. on Wednesday, the 22nd. Thank you. And Mr. Lingenfelter will be there to answer questions, and we'll just kind of talk about what the timeline is. He may not have like exact what is actually going in there, but I figured this would be a good time to just kind of get more information out there.
Any other new business? Mrs. Hoover?
Just a couple more. This Free the Trees is a collaboration that Candace Winterbauer and I did with the tree board. And we do have a tree abatement date scheduled for Monday, which is MLK Day. It's going to be really, really cold, so I can pretty guarantee you we're not going to do it, but I would love for folks to sign up because we will reschedule, and that way we would have your contact information. One of the reasons this ivy abatement is so important is Norwood has a pretty significant winter creeper and English ivy problem, and it is choking out some of our well, not only our little trees, but some of our really generational trees. I have an oak tree just 2 doors down that has pretty significant damage. And so that is a pretty easy way we can save 100-year-old trees is by removing that ivy. So please, would love for folks to show up to that. And it kind of ties into the next item, if you would want to flip forward. And that is a Tree City USA. When I first came on council, trees. I wanted trees. I want every single tree that we can have. They are good for flooding abatement, for reducing asthma, for increasing test scores, for increased mental health. Trees are basically only good as long as you plant the right one in the right place. And the Tree City USA is a way that the city can access some federal funding. One of the big things that the tree board has said since I've been on council is we need money. Well, we don't have any money. So our job is to try to help find the money. So by going through this Tree USA process, we've been meeting with Wendy Van Buren. She's the forester from the Department of Natural Resources. She's a forester for our area. And she is going to kind of hold our hands through the process. And I wanted to share what the process is because I think that that's helpful for folks. One is you need to have a tree board that meets 6 times a year with quorum. So that's something that they're getting ready to do. Norwood already has a tree ordinance, so that is fantastic. We have to spend $2 per capita or accrue that amount of money. So that would be about $40,000. And so we can do that by counting the time that our public works tree guy is trimming trees, removing trees, mulching trees. We can use that, we can get paid we can count $33 per volunteer hour. So when we have such a thing as the Free the Trees event, and we have 5 people or 10 people, let's say 10 people, and they are there, I mean, that money can start adding up pretty quickly. So that's going to be really important for us to pay attention to. And then we would need to celebrate Arbor Day, which that's just fun. So this is something that the tree board is going to be working on with support from the Department of Natural Resources. And Candace and I will sort of be in the background helping however we can to to really regrow our tree canopy. And the picture here is actually Donna Lake, who everyone knows Donna Lake. She's had every position in City Hall, or the city of Cincinnati, or Norwood, excuse me. And Councilwoman Winterbauer planting a tree that was purchased as a anniversary gift to Mrs. Lake and her husband, and planted it in Victory Park as a donation to a Norwood veteran. So check that out. Mrs. Winterbauer is going to be in charge of watering it, because that's another important part, is we really take care of these trees for the first couple of years, so they really get really good roots. So look for that. Super exciting. And then my last thing, Girl Scout cookie time. Everyone knows a Girl Scout. I would highly encourage you to support that. At least 50% of the women on council have been Girl Scouts. Ms. Ruins?
Surprisingly, no.
I can't do math then. 2 out of 3, 2 out of 5, 2 out of 5 are Girl Scouts. It's all about leadership. It's about getting girls out and about, exploring, challenging, only good things as far as I'm concerned. So I encourage you to get your Thin Mints, because clearly those are the best ones.
Already bought mine.
Oh, I'm waiting for my delivery.
Mr. Braden, I'm going to have to call you out of order now, bursts like that.
Pardon me.
And that is all I have. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Any other new business? Mrs. Bowling?
This is not new business. Just to, if you like Toastiers as much as I do, this is the last year for them. So stock up, put them in your freezer. They're the best. Sorry, Thin Mints.
All right. Any other new business? Oops. Just a reminder, if anyone wants to scan the QR code.
QR code.
There
We
you
want to
go.
hear from everybody.
All right. Moving on to next items on the agenda. The communications, we have a letter from Mr. Moore regarding the Law Director's Annual Report for 2024. Mrs. Bowling.
I move that we receive and file as if read.
Motion by Mrs. Bowling to receive and file as if read. Mr. Garten.
Second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Garten. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I will vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Garten,
Make a motion that we adjourn.
is there a second? Mrs. Hoover,
I'll second.
call the roll, please.
I apologize. Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce? I vote yes. Mrs. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurton?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. This meeting is hereby adjourned.